Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We have entered the Gospel of Mark. Let me sort of remind you that we are um, um, uh, the Gospel of Mark is the shortest Gospel, is what I meant to say here. And so I'm not going to spend as much time on Mark as I did in Matthew. Uh, because a lot of it is we're rehashing some of the same stories. However, that is not to say that we won't benefit from Matthew's perspective. And I think that's important because, um, as I told you before, when I didn't get into a lot of the scholarly um, debate um, on if, for example, um, who is the Matthew? I mean, if Mark wrote Matthew, and then you have some of the scholarly debates as to, you know, did uh, did Matthew copy from Mark's gospel and Luke and all that kind of stuff. So some of that study is good, uh, and if you wanted to get into that kind of study, again, there is a plethora of study aids out there for that. um, but we're going to go rather quickly through Mark's gospel. One, two, I just thought of this because Mark takes us rather quickly through the gospel. Some things we'll stop and kind of just talk about. I think it's going to be very important, especially in chapter 4. But for the most part, we'll just glide through it as Matthew, I'm sorry, as Mark takes us through. So many of these stories that we're going to kind of read, we covered them in Matthew. But again, look at the Gospels. As I said, you look at the Gospels. They're not carbon copies of one another, although what is called the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that they kind of tell the stories in the same way. But when you look closely, it's like looking at coming to a four-way stop sign. Excuse me. So just like now, as you're looking at me through this camera here, right, you see a picture. As I'm looking at this, you see a picture, right, of me this way. Now, if I was to show you a picture from this direction, okay, you would see a different side. If I show you a picture from this direction, you would see a different side. Then, of course, if I show you a picture from the back, you would see a different side of the same space that what you see right here. Okay, just different sides. So there are differences in the story as they are told from different perspectives. So, like if you at a four-way stop sign and you witness a car accident, then you would have four different views from the car from that perspective. Somebody might have seen the crash this way, the other would have seen, and maybe they would have seen, a witness on the other side of the street, while another one would have heard. They're telling the same story, but different views and different details. So that's how you should look at the four Gospels. All right, so let's get right back in it. We left off in chapter 1, and here we go. Verse. Oh, so again, remember he told the story. So right away from chapters 1 all the way down here to verse 20. I'm sorry, chapter 1, verse 1 down to verse 20. we're already, Jesus has already chosen his disciples. And so we're just going to pick it up. Verse 21 says, then they went into Capernaum. Now, this is where actually Jesus settled down. He grew up in Nazareth, and when he came of age, he left and went to Capernaum. He says, and right away he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath day and began to teach. I think I covered this one. I'm sorry. I got to skip down here. Well, I'll read it again. He says, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath day and began to teach. Now, just by way of reminder too, the synagogues were just, especially right now, the synagogues were not temples. They were meeting places where they would teach, pray. They did not offer any animal sacrifices. So they were just, and you can almost say they were kind of like many places, small places where people away from Jerusalem, because at this time the temple is in existence. So if you wanted to worship at the temple, if you wanted to offer the proper sacrifice, you had to travel to Jerusalem. The male still had to travel 3 times a year to Jerusalem. He said they were astonished at his teaching because, unlike the scribes, he was teaching them as one having authority. So, kind of, the idea was that the scribes were boring and you really probably didn't learn anything. And they would quote a bunch of rabbis and men. A lot of churches do it today too. But anyway, he said, just then a man with an unclean spirit was in the synagogue, and he cried out, what do you have to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come out to destroy us? I know you, who you are, the Holy One of God. But Jesus rebuked the man and said, be quiet and come out of him. Now, I do want to revisit this. I think I kind of rushed through it last time, but this is very interesting. When we talk about demon possession, and one, you see how Scripture presents demon possession and how they related to Jesus, unlike fictional TV. Fictional TV, they always make the demons seem very powerful. They'll slap Jesus around if you leave it to them. They slap the priest around and stuff. There are what is called deliverance ministry that make a mockery out of true biblical deliverance. You have these services where you got these people supposed to be demon possessed, and I can tell you from experience, a lot of these people are not demon possessed. They get into an atmosphere and they they conform to the atmosphere. And I remember I had a personal friend that convinced himself he was demon possessed. Then you go to these deliverance services, and so they cast the devils out, and they do this in many ways. You have this show put on by some of these pastors, some of these ministers, and they'd be like, who is your name? What is your name? And all that kind of stuff while, kind of prancing around. And then you have, sometimes they have you throwing up and all of that. Now, let me tell you why these guys, you can tell that these people are not truly demon possessed. They only act that way in the church service. They don't act that way at work. They don't act that way, in the supermarket. Why? Because you get locked up. When I say locked up, you can get locked up in a mental hospital if you act like that. But anyway, if you notice here, Jesus rebuked him and said, be quiet and come out of him. He didn't go through this whole, what is your name? How many legions are you? And all this kind of stuff that you see with these guys. Come out, and notice this. And the unclean spirit conversed him, shouted with a loud voice, and came out of him. That's it in the story. And then he says that they were all amazed. So they began to argue with one another, saying, what is this new teaching? With authority, he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. News about him then spread throughout the entire vicinity of Galilee. So, and of course, we're going to see this repeated all the time. Jesus casting out devils, part of the healing ministry. And again, notice that actual deliverance happened. Now, he says, as soon as they left the synagogue, they went into Andrew's, uh, Simon Andrew's house with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law was lying in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once, right? At once. So again, remember, we're going to always see this rapid pace with Mark, immediately, right away. Notice this, at once. So he went and took her by the hand, raised her up, the fever left her, and she began to serve them. This was Peter's mother. Now, what is interesting about this is he was married. And we don't have a lot of information on the apostles. They don't give us a lot of details. This is one of the details we have, that not only was Peter married, but then here is his mother-in-law presumably living with him. She had a fever. Jesus healed her, and then boom, she starts to serve him. So completely healed. He says that when the evening came, after the sun had set, they began bringing to him all those who were sick and those who were demon possessed. So there's again, sick and demon possessed. And the whole town was assembled at the door, and he healed many who were sick with various diseases and drove out many demons. But he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Now, there's a logic to this, why Jesus would say, don't mention my name, because people were very superstitious, right, about this. We're going to come across a story where Jesus will cast the devil out of a man, and the town is going to be so frightened by it that they're going to ask Jesus to leave. Okay, and other times too, so people would think, okay, is he a warlock or something like that? Verse 35 says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up and went out and made his way to a desert place. And when he was praying there, Simon and his companions were searching for him. Now, again, we get this little glimpse that here is Jesus' prayer life, right? He gets up and he goes out and he prays, right? And to me, the takeaway is the idea of the fact that Jesus prayed. Okay, he had a prayer life. He says they found him and said, everyone is looking for you. So at this point now, he has amassed a huge following. They wanted to kind of keep him there. And here's his reply. And he said to them, let us go on to the neighboring villages so that I may preach there too. That is why I have come. And so he went into all of Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. Notice the region was full of, pretty much the synagogues served again as community-based, you could say, places to gather, to sing songs, as I said, teach reading. Usually that's what would happen. They would sing songs, some psalms. Then they would teach. They would have a reading of the law. And that's kind of the essence of what the synagogue was designed to do. Some of them also had schools too. Okay. But notice Jesus says he didn't confine himself to one location. And even you can see how much people gravitated to him. They kind of literally wanted to keep him. He wanted to keep him, so they wanted to keep him there, and you can't blame them, right? But he says, let us go on to neighboring villages so that I may preach there too. That is why I have come. Now, to kind of give us also a glimpse of when we talk about the 3.5 year public ministry of Jesus. So what was that 3.5 years for? Because really, if you stop and think about it, any time he could have died on the cross. But one of the things about The purpose is announcing, preaching, demonstrating, showing himself as a Messiah. This is why he's come, to preach and proclaim that. Now, this is also the mission of the church, that there should be preaching in all of the world. More on that at the end of the book, the Great Commission, as we call it. Verse 40 says, Then a man with a serious skin disease came to him and on his knees begged him. And says, If you are willing, you can make me clean. Now, I probably said this in the when I went through Mark's gospel, that I'm reading from the Holman Christian Standard Bible. Yeah, I just like the translation. This is my translation of choice. I love this translation. And the way that when you look the term serious skin disease, this is how they translate serious skin disease. While if you read the King James and other, they say leprosy. So obviously, I'm very used to reading this as leprosy. So when it says serious skin disease, the scholars behind the translation, they make their case as to why they chose serious skin disease, which is, they say, probably this is the better translation. Again, I don't really get into the scholarly work because I'm not qualified. But either way, serious skin disease, and I'll just say leprosy, since we kind of know it best from that. So, and then also in the Holman Christian translation, if you go in the Old Testament, they use the same instead of leprosy. Like so in Leviticus, I think Leviticus devotes several chapters to the instructions to the priest. And now leprosy is curable. Back then it wasn't. It was the COVID-19 of the day with no cure, right? So if you got under the law, if you contracted leprosy, one, you were isolated because of how easy transmittable it is. It was, I should say. Even the clothes, even the clothes were gathered and burned. And so oftentimes people would end up living in leper colonies, as they call them. So the reason why I say that is because this man coming to Jesus was an act of faith, because probably when people saw him, they scattered. So he came to Jesus, and then he got close enough, he fell on his knees and begged him and said, If you are willing, you can make me clean. And that's a powerful statement there. One, he says, if you are willing, not if you can, he said, if you're willing, you can make me clean. So verse 44 says, moved with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched him. I am willing, he told him, be made clean. And immediately disease left him and he was healed. So this is kind of, again, one of a touching story when Jesus says to him, I am willing. And the idea of healing today, and I'm not going to get too deep in it, because that probably not probably, but it deserves its own treatment to really unpack. So we can ask the question: how come people are not getting healed today? Why don't we see healings like you see in the Bible? And when I say what you see, what a lot of these healing ministers are fake, because people do not get healed. They don't. It's a whole show. And so they don't get healed. And I can say that deserves its own, kind of treatment there. But I do believe that God is willing to heal. Now, I cannot explain to you why people are not getting healed. Why people die of cancer, die of their diseases, especially when they pray, especially when they say they have faith. I can't explain to you why. But I do believe that God healed if you ask him so. Now, verse 43 says, Then he sternly warned him and sent him away at once, telling him, See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer what Moses prescribed for your cleansing as a testimony to them. So Jesus currently, as in his ministry, is operating under the Old Testament law. That's why he would always tell them, go to the temple now and offer to, no, he said, go show yourself to the priest to offer what Moses has prescribed for the cleansing. Sometimes it can be like a turtle dove or whatever you can afford some cases. But he always told them, offer under the law, according to the law. But look at this, verse 45. Yet he went out and began to proclaim it widely and to spread the news, with the results that Jesus could no longer enter the town openly. So this is one of the reasons why he would always say, don't go broadcasting it. Why? Because it became so crowded, he now could no longer openly walk. Because one, he would be thrown, people would crush him. He said, but he was out in the desert place, and they would come to him from everywhere. So notice he didn't want him in the crowd, in the town. So he went out in the desert place, and this is where we will see a lot of his camp meetings, where he would feed the 5,000, 4,000. And again, you see people now. Again, the sad thing about this, of course, is towards the end, how people, having experiencing all of this, that they will still yell, crucify him, crucify him. All right, guys. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I'll see you in the next study.